Hello and welcome to Lecture 10 on Psychological Disorders. So we're going to continue talking about negative and positive symptoms of schizophrenia, and then we're going to end by talking about the biological and environmental factors that contribute to schizophrenia. So another positive symptom is disorganized behavior. So this is when someone acts in very strange or unusual ways. And it might include strange movement of the limbs. It could include bizarre speech, inappropriate self-care. So that could include things like not dressing properly, not showering or bathing. They don't brush their teeth regularly, not wearing clean clothes, just eating cereal, and that's all. They're just not able to take care of themselves. Their basic self-care. Now, people with schizophrenia often act strangely. Sometimes they display very unpredictable agitation, and sometimes they get very childish and silly. The behavior can be very disorganized, and that can be really difficult for the people around them. Now, sometimes people with schizophrenia display what's called catatonic behavior. And this means that they show a decrease in responsiveness to the environment. So I want you to imagine a sloth. As we all know, sloths move incredibly slowly. When someone becomes catatonic, they start to move more and more slowly. And sometimes they actually get stuck in very odd positions. Their arms might be up in the air in unusual positions, and they just stay frozen like that for a while. It could be hours. And then, once they start to move again, it takes a very long time for them to get their arms back down. People exhibiting catatonic behavior sometimes will mindlessly repeat words that they hear, which is called echolalia. It's really annoying, but it is part of the disorganized behavior. So we've talked about positive symptoms. Let's talk about the negative. Negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Negative symptoms are symptoms of schizophrenia that are marked by deficits in functioning, such as apathy, lack of emotion, and slowed speech and movement. Something that we see in those with schizophrenia is that sometimes they avoid eye contact, and they seem very apathetic. Now, how each patient has different symptoms. The way their symptoms manifest is different. Some may only have positive symptoms, some might only have negative symptoms, some have a mix. So I'm just going through, each category of symptoms, and then just know that the presentation of schizophrenia with every patient is different. Those who have a lot of negative symptoms with schizophrenia, they don't express emotion. They're extremely blunt, emotionally blunted. Their speech is slow, and they use a very monotonous tone of voice. They have long pauses before they answer. They don't respond to questions. And sometimes they will start an utterance, but they can't finish it. Movements may be slowed, and the overall amount of movement is reduced, and there's little initiation of behavior, and no interest in social participation. The negative symptoms can be very difficult. There's that sloth-like tendency. Now, although positive symptoms of schizophrenia, such as the delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized behavior, these can be dramatically reduced or eliminated with antipsychotic medications. those who have the negative symptoms of schizophrenia are often treatment resistant. How awful is that? To have this horrific mental illness and be treatment resistant. Because negative symptoms are more resistant to medications, there is some speculation that perhaps the positive symptoms and negative symptoms have different organic causes. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. If you think about the differences between the positive symptoms of schizophrenia and the negative symptoms of schizophrenia, they are vastly different. It wouldn't surprise me if they have had different organic causes. Now, the disorder is very, very genetic. If one identical twin has schizophrenia, the likelihood of the other twin developing schizophrenia is almost 50%. That drops to 14% if the twins are fraternal. This is a very genetic disorder. Now, all genetic predispositions are not destiny. They're predispositions, but they aren't guaranteed to happen. So just because someone has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder in your family does not mean that you're going to develop schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, or that your children will develop these disorders. It does mean that they have a higher likelihood of developing these disorders. Genetics is complicated, but genetic predispositions are not your destiny. They are a possibility. Let's see, people with schizophrenia have some rare mutations in their DNA, about 3 to 4 times more often than healthy individuals, especially in genes related to brain development and to neurological functioning. Now, this is very interesting to me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I'm not sure if it's in my next slide or not. Okay, it's not, but so take a look at this in your textbook, because it evaluates the role of genetics in schizophrenia. Just a second. Okay. Now, some of the biological causes. In the brain, I'll come back to this slide, we have what are called ventricles. And I mentioned this earlier in this chapter, but those who have schizophrenia tend to have much larger ventricles. So ventricles are just empty spaces that fill up with cerebral spinal fluid. And as you can see, there's a big, big difference between the ventricle size in these two individuals. That's one of the differences. We also see tissue differences. The gray matter of the brain is collapsed. The cells are all there, but they're not working properly because they've kind of compressed on each other. So it looks like there's a reduction of tissue, giving that increased space, but it's actually just that the gray tissue has kind of collapsed on itself. Now, the gray tissue is the cell bodies of the neurons. This altered reduction in tissue, I guess we'll just call it that, is especially prevalent in the frontal lobe and the medial temporal lobe. We've talked a little bit about those. Okay. Schizophrenia, we do see some neurotransmitter abnormalities with schizophrenia, the largest one being dopamine. So dopamine is your pleasure neurotransmitter, but it does a lot of other things too. With schizophrenia, so something we see is that so you can take drugs that block dopamine activity, and you can take drugs that increase dopamine activity. what they see is that if someone with schizophrenia takes a drug that blocks dopamine activity, they see a decrease in symptoms. If they take a drug that increases the activity of dopamine, their symptoms increase. We know that dopamine levels are really, really critical to schizophrenia. And it is this excess in dopamine that could be responsible for the hallucinations that some people with schizophrenia experience. Now, there's other neurotransmitters, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, glutamate, acetylcholine, but we're not going to go into all that. Dopamine is the biggie. There is evidence that some neurological signs of schizophrenia can be observed long before the disorder is diagnosed. A study showed that of young people who had two or three of the first three factors, so that would be the first three of the 5 symptoms, nearly 80% developed full-blown psychosis. Something they see is that when they talk to family members, often family members will say, yeah, he was an odd kid. We always really noticed that he was just really odd. And that is something that families say frequently about their loved one when they're diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's often not a huge surprise of a diagnosis. It's not, you start to see unusual behaviors, but there's a big difference between being odd and developing the symptoms of schizophrenia. But there does seem to be these little precursors that kind of, you look back and you realize, oh, I bet that's related to these new symptoms and now this new diagnosis. Okay, psychologists determined that 5 factors predicted the onset of psychotic disorders: a family history of schizophrenia, they had higher levels of social impairment, they tended to be highly suspicious and paranoid, they had a history of substance abuse, and they had a higher level of unusual thoughts than the average person, because we all have unusual thoughts. It's just how often do we have them and how unusual are they? So these 5 factors predicted the onset of psychotic disorders. Now, there's also some environmental factors. Environmental stress can contribute to the development of schizophrenia. Every genetic predisposition needs a trigger. Environmental stress can trigger genetic predispositions. It can trigger schizophrenia if you have that genetic predisposition. For some reason, being born and or raised in an urban area doubles the risk of developing schizophrenia if you have a predisposition for the disease. Elevated stress contributes to its development. There is a speculation that maybe there is a virus that triggers schizophrenia. And I find that very interesting. There's some research going on into that. This is interesting to me. People with schizophrenia are more likely to have been born during late winter and early spring. And mothers of children born in late winter and early spring were in their 2nd trimester of pregnancy during flu season. Mothers of people with schizophrenia are more likely than other mothers to have contracted influenza during their 2nd trimester. And growing up in a dysfunctional family may increase the risks of developing schizophrenia for those who are genetically at risk. If you're pregnant or going to become pregnant, get your flu shot. Okay, we're going to end there. Thank you for your patience. This was a lot of information in this chapter, and I know it was a lot of lecture time. So please don't hesitate to contact me with any questions. Thanks so much.